Actually, I sold my house, said our younger brother-in-law, leaving my husband and me surprised and speechless. The mother-in-law was the most shocked of all.
Why did you do such a thing? And weren't you supposed to come pick me up?
And confronted our younger brother-in-law, who tried to calm her down and began to explain the reason. I'm Kendall. I work from home with my husband Harold and enjoy the relaxed environment that allows us to take breaks whenever we want. We were both satisfied with our situation. However, then my husband's mother moved in with us. Although we have no major complaints, as we were financially stable, things started to change.
Why don't you go to work?
My mother-in-law said, casting a disapproving gaze at me and my husband. I felt tired and frustrated at her words, as if it was starting all over again. When my mother-in-law first asked us that question, we explained to her about our work-from-home situation. However, she refused to understand and continued,
Are you not just playing around? I've even told Harold about it. When are you going to start working properly? Haven't you considered your future?
She didn't even try to comprehend our work.
I'm worried. Maybe it was a mistake to come and live with you. Maybe we should have gone to Kevin's house,
she said, always sighing and lamenting. Kevin is my husband's younger brother. It seems that he found a wealthy woman named Olivia as his wife and is now living off her. However, his mother doesn't know about it because he asked us not to tell her.
Kevin's house is not a small house like this. It's a huge one like a foreign castle. Well, I'm planning to move to Kevin's house eventually, so it will become my house,
said my mother-in-law as she waited for my brother-in-law to pick her up. My husband and I knew that my brother-in-law and his wife had no plans to pick up my mother-in-law. Because once my husband had contacted my beloved brother-in-law and suggested to him, why don't you live with mom together? However, my brother-in-law refused to live with my mother-in-law. Since then, we have been living together. Even though our work is remote, my mother-in-law has accepted that we are not just idling around. However, something happened that made it impossible to continue like this. My brother-in-law suddenly contacted us. He said, I'm coming over to your place this weekend, without waiting for our response, and then promptly hung up the phone. What should we do? That guy never changes with his selfish ways. My husband and I were perplexed. During our conversation, my mother-in-law leaned forward eagerly. She's come to pick me up, help me with the moving preparations, said my mother-in-law, pulling my husband into a room. He looked at her with a complicated expression and said, Mom, he probably didn't mean it like that. Something happened, and he contacted us for a reason. But my mother-in-law didn't seem convinced. That's not possible. But on the phone, he didn't say he was coming to pick you up. He just hasn't said it yet, right? I'm so sick of this house. You probably want to treat me like a maid, but it's not going to happen, said the mother-in-law, snorting in dissatisfaction. We didn't understand why she was having such delusions of persecutions. Since coming to our house, the mother-in-law had been waking up whenever she wanted and not doing any housework, instead spending her time receiving an allowance. Well, we had no intention of forcing her to stay, so we packed her things as she said and waited for my brother-in-law to come. On the weekend, the brother-in-law and his wife came to our house. As soon as they arrived, they had a strange look on their faces, as if trying to flatter us. I have a bad feeling about this. Afraid to make matters worse, my mother-in-law emerged with shining eyes and said, Welcome. Listen, Kendall can't do any housework, so I have to do it for her, and Harold ignores me. Don't you think it's terrible? With the face of a victim, she pushed my husband aside and invited my brother-in-law into the house. Hey guys, don't treat mom like that.
That's not true. I endorse her, yes. But give her her allowance and let her eat what she likes. Besides, Michael does the housework.
My husband said it was a complicated expression, but my brother-in-law just looked at him suspiciously. My brother has always been an idiot, and he has been neglecting the mother without realizing it. Canada also seems like the type who doesn't care.
I see. Kevin really understands me after all.
During this conversation, my husband and I couldn't help but grimace. Nevertheless, since they had come, we invited the brother-in-law and his wife to the living room. We all sat around the table with my husband and me on one side, the brother-in-law and his wife on the other.
Hey, what are you guys sitting there for? There is some tea.
Oh, shouldn't you be in fun making it? Found nothing to bowl.
What are you saying? Making an old lady do the work. See? Kevin, this is what Kendall is like.
The mother-in-law said this and even pretended to cry. I was so fed up with her that I didn't even feel like arguing. After I finished serving tea, my brother-in-law and his wife put on somber faces. Upon hearing the words of my brother-in-law, my husband and I were stunned and speechless.
Wait, why did you do something like that? Weren't you supposed to come pick me up?
The mother-in-law was shaken and confronted my brother-in-law. Said the brother-in-law nonchalantly, grinning, "My husband and I sighed in exasperation. We're counting on you. You're the only one we can rely on, my big brother," he said. My brother-in-law. He and his wife both bowed their heads. I think we had a complicated expression on our faces. However, if they had nowhere to live, there was nothing we could do. We allowed my brother-in-law and his wife to stay in our home temporarily. In return, we made them promise to leave in a month. My brother-in-law said, "I understand," left as usual and went back, starting to prepare to send his luggage. After my brother-in-law and his wife left, my mother-in-law had a pensive look on her face and remained silent. My husband and I thought that my mother-in-law was shocked when we saw her like that. The next day, the brother-in-law's luggage arrived promptly. "There's so many. Where should we put them?" "That's a problem. We might have to sell some or rent a locker." My husband and I carried the brother-in-law's luggage while discussing such matters. Without even helping us, the mother-in-law said something outrageous to us. "I've been thinking, wouldn't it be reassuring if Kevin were here in the future? So, can you freeloaders leave? If you really have to, then Harold can stay. But I don't want a useless daughter-in-law who can't do anything. Get a divorce. If you do, the space that Kendall was in will be available, and all this luggage can be stored there." The mother-in-law's eyes shone as she sought agreement from my husband. "I don't know what you're talking about," my husband said as usual, looking exasperated. Just then, the brother-in-law and his wife arrived. The mother-in-law welcomed the brother-in-law with great enthusiasm. I was still shaken by the mother-in-law's words earlier, but my husband put them aside for the moment and asked the brother-in-law to do something about the luggage. "There are more than we thought, so please rent some lockers or sell some to reduce the amount," my husband said, and the brother-in-law glared at him, saying, What are you talking about? This is important luggage. We can't just sell it. And if we put it in the locker and someone steals it, what are we going to do? If it gets damaged, will you take responsibility, big brother?" The brother-in-law acted selfishly, and my husband shook his head in disbelief. "This is our house. It's only natural that you should be patient with us a little. If you don't like it, find a new place to live and move out." At this point, our mother-in-law shouted, "What are you saying? I told you earlier, if you don't like Kevin as family, then you should leave. You two are nines and you are not necessary in this house. Well, Kevin is trying to start the business. You guys are just saying you're doing remote work, but all you're doing is lazing around at home. That's a nuisance." She said it as if it were her own house. My husband and I were stunned and looked at each other. The younger brother and his wife listened to the mother-in-law's words with surprised expressions. But then they started to grin and said, "That might not be a bad idea." "Mom, that's a great idea." "Yeah, it's a hassle to look for a new place, so we could just stay here. So please sell this house, right?" urged Olivia. "I also feel burdened having a brother-in-law, so it would be helpful for us too." "And since our mother-in-law also agrees, please sell this house to us," said the sister-in-law. "I can't believe you're saying something so stupid," mother-in-law interjected, triumphantly raising her voice over my husband's words. "Hey, both Kevin and Olivia are saying the same thing. What about you, Harold? If you're going to get a divorce, you can stay here," the mother-in-law said, glaring triumphantly at me. I braced myself to retort to my mother-in-law's words. But before I could, my husband, who was standing next to me, spoke up. "Don't say such selfish things. Why does Kendall have to live?" My husband shouted, his face turning bright red with anger. "Don't shout so much. It's better if we don't have a freeloader." The mother-in-law retorted to my husband, "Tend anything?" But he replied in a tone of disbelief, "You don't understand anything. This is my wife's house," my husband said, and my mother-in-law and brother-in-law's spouses were taken aback. My husband continued to speak, piling onto their surprise. "Kendall bought this house for us to live in together," he said. "What are you talking about? A husband should be the one to buy a house," my mother-in-law protested. "There's no such rule. Besides, Kendall is the one providing all your pocket money and living expenses. You have a small pension, and it's hard to live freely on that alone. Kendall offered to take care of it for you," my husband said, glaring at his mother with an intense expression. His mother didn't seem to believe him and looked at me with a sarcastic smile. "I can't believe it. Kendall just spends all day playing on the computer and doesn't even do the housework properly. And my pocket money, wasn't it paid out of my own pension? Otherwise, there's no way I could pay Kendall $500 a month, my mother-in-law continued. Kendall manages my pension on her own. My mother-in-law said, maybe she's telling you that, but it's obvious that the money comes from my pension. And looking at me with pride. I stare back at my mother-in-law, not willing to back down. It's the truth. I have succeeded as a self-employed person, I said firmly. Lies. All lies, my mother-in-law retorted. Why don't you just divorce her if she's constantly lying like this? You can come and live with me and Kevin. Besides, there's no proof that Kendall is actually earning anything. This is it, I said, and pulled out my payslip to show to my mother-in-law. She and my brother-in-law's wife opened their eyes wide in surprise. Mom hasn't used any of her pension since she came here. Kendall has been managing Mom's finances so that if Mom ever wants to leave and live on her own, she'll be able to, so that she can do so. Despite that, it's Mom who's causing trouble and getting in Kendall's way by bossing her around. If Mom doesn't like Kendall, you can leave right now.
I don't believe that.
My brother and his wife are welcome to stay temporarily, but it's only natural that they should make some effort to endure the inconvenience. We didn't ask them to come live with us in the first place. We only allowed it because they begged us to. So don't think you're entitled to anything. My husband said, glaring at his brother and sister-in-law. The younger brother's family, who had never seen the husband raise his voice before, broke out in a cold sweat as he glared at them. I'm just kidding. But you're making a lot of money, aren't you? I wish you could teach me a little bit about the tricks of the trade. Just kidding. Brixt, Olivia.
Oh yes, there is Joe. It's true that I'm a bit worried about living with my sister-in-law, but she's a good person,
said the brother-in-law as he and his wife exchanged smiles. However, their mother-in-law was not willing to give in.
I can't believe you're acting so high and mighty when you're in need. That's enough. Harold, you should leave the house too. It would be good for you to go out into the world and experience its harshness.
That's what my mother-in-law said, and no matter what we said, she wouldn't listen. My husband and I were dumbfounded. I interrupted her words by saying, fine, we'll pack up our things and move to a new house. You'll be stuck paying off the mortgage for this house, but that's fine with us. Don't come crying to us for help because we won't give you a hand.
As Mom says that, and since Harold also feels the same way, it's separation. By station, I'll leave. It may be difficult to continue living as we have until now, even with our pensions. But there's nothing we can do about it,
I said. But my mother-in-law yelled at us with a red face.
Get out.
Hey, that's a lie, right? Wait a minute. There's no need to do something like that.
Right, with you guys around, everything will be fine.
8 younger brothers and his wife tried to stop us, but the mother-in-law glared at us aggressively and said, don't talk to them. Kevin, you're going to become a president, right? You can use my pension too. So hurry up and start your own business and show us how successful you can be. If you go against us, you'll regret it. I'll make sure you learn your lesson, declared the mother-in-law with great fervor. After hearing those words from the mother-in-law, we decided to stop getting involved with her and the brother-in-law and left the house. Of course, the mortgage on the house was still outstanding, but we had already changed the name on the loan to the brother-in-law's. Some time had passed since then, and although we're still dissatisfied with what had happened, we were free from our mother-in-law's sarcastic remarks and were living our lives at our own pace. One day, while we were working from home in our new apartment as usual, our mother-in-law called my husband crying. Kevin secretly took my pension and disappeared. He hasn't come back for a week. I'm left behind with Olivia, and we're struggling at home. Please help me, said my mother-in-law, crying on the phone to my husband. After calming down his mother, my husband asked why Kevin disappeared. His mother replied, after that, I gave all of my pension to Kevin for his business, but he used it all on gamble. When I blamed him for it, he disappeared. She pleaded desperately with tears in her eyes. She started crying, and the conversation became difficult, so my sister-in-law took over the phone. Can you call us, brother? We can't live like this anymore. Kevin failed in his business, and after selling the house we were living in, we were disowned by our family. Dad can't forgive us for selling that house, and we haven't been able to contact him or my mom since then. The sister-in-law pleaded to my husband. As in response to the behavior of the two, my husband let out a sigh of exasperation, saying, that's unfortunate. But don't get us involved in this.
But don't get us involved in this. Better stay when we left the house so we wouldn't help them even if they come begging. As for Kevin, they can file a missing person report with the police. It's not our concern. Cross-brush theirs. Trust your own conscience.
My husband said that and hung up the phone. I was surprised, but my husband said it's the natural consequence, and I agreed with him. After that, my mother-in-law and sister-in-law kept calling my husband's phone multiple times, but he grew increasingly irritated with their calls. When he answered, my sister-in-law would plead, "I don't know how to report someone as missing," while crying. Did they not know about this? My husband and I were surprised and advised them to call the police. However, we were unable to locate my brother-in-law's whereabouts. Just when we thought he would never be found, we were told that he had been caught for robbing a bank in another prefecture. It seems he did it to repay his debts. It was not his first crime, and it is likely that he will receive a prison sentence. It sounds like the sister-in-law is unable to return to her parents' home and is currently living with my mother-in-law in the house that was sold. It's unclear whether she will choose to divorce her husband or not. That's probably not the priority right now. I've registered with a temp agency and am scraping by every day at my first job, even though I'm working frantically. My mother-in-law has lost all her pension and had to pay off my arrested brother-in-law's debt instead. My mother-in-law started working part-time like my sister-in-law to pay off that debt. My husband and I sympathized with them, but we told them we have no intention of helping them in any way and haven't been in touch with them. Now they're probably experiencing the harshness of the world. My mother-in-law would say, "My husband and I are happy that we've been able to return to peaceful days, even though there were various changes after my mother-in-law lived with us."